Welcome back to New Day Northwest. You know, when you think of farming, we often imagine far distant fields. But our next guest is about to give us some insight into agriculture happening right in our own backyard, specifically in the Skagit Valley. Jessica Gigot is the author of a new book called A Little Bit of Land. And Jessica joins me now on the couch this morning. Welcome to New Day.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the book. What is it about?
Well, it's about farming. It's also about my life. It sort of takes place from when I graduated college to where I am now, where I have young children, and I've been living in the Skagit Valley for about 20 years. I didn't grow up on a farm, and when people come to visit our farm in the Skagit Valley, the question I get is, you know, did you grow up on a farm? You must have. And I always laugh because I grew up in the suburbs, you know, east of Seattle, and I feel like I needed to write this story to really unpack why I wanted to learn so much about food and farming.
Yeah, okay, so because that's not typically a path that people take. I grew up in the suburbs and now I want to own a farm. How did you get there?
You know, it's a funny story. I mean, I feel like I was always drawn to plants and animals, and I studied biology in college. But even, you know, as a field biologist, that never felt like enough. I really wanted to be more in connection with the natural world, and I got really interested in food, and I mean, I love food in general, but just how we eat, what we you know, what we know about, you know, what goes into our bodies and where it comes from.
Right.
I just found that fascinating, and it's taken 20 years to really even start to begin to understand, you know, what is a food system, what is a healthy food system.
Yeah. I think a lot of people really get into understanding what it means to grow their own food, to have their own food, but these people are doing it in their backyard. You have a farm. Are you taking this stuff to commerce?
Yeah, so we have a farm. I mean, I call it a micro creamery, a micro dairy. It's had various iterations. We started out growing vegetables and selling those at farmers markets. We had a few pet sheep, and then as I learned more about them, I wanted to work with them more personally, I guess, on the farm, and so we started this creamery, which, you know, I'm not trying to make it sound easy. It was a lot of trial and error, and we also received a lot of government support through the United States Department of Agriculture and some of the young farmer programs. I'm not really a young farmer anymore, but I was when I started, and so I've been learning as I go, and I guess that's my, you know, at my heart, I'm an educator too, so I feel like I've been trying to learn and share about what I'm learning because it's also new to me as well.
And I think it's really fascinating because you said you live in Skagit Valley for 20 years. I had no idea that there is, I understand, quite a history of farming in Skagit Valley.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, if you look at I-5 from Washington to California, besides Salinas Valley, you know, Skagit Valley is really the last remaining intact piece of farmland, and it's, you know, it's not that big necessarily, but it produces a ton of food. I mean, you know, there's seed crops, there's potatoes, and we're a really, really small part of that. And I think that's an interesting conversation of how do you go from these multi-generational farms to some of the newer growers that are trying to make a life and a living there. And it's a big question right now.
And it's really important, especially when you're looking at lack of water resources in California, where a lot of our food across the nation is grown. We do need to pay attention to this, to preserve what you're doing. Let's talk about also the importance of small farms and small farm education.
Yeah, I think, you know, small farms are really the innovators in agriculture right now. I think, you know, as we approach some of these big issues, climate change and water conservation, looking at some of the tools and the methods that small farms are using are going to really help us work towards a more regenerative agriculture, which is kind of the buzzword right now. You know, and it's important to say, too, that the Skagit Valley wasn't always farmland. It was tidelands, and it was tribal lands. And so I think there's also a food sovereignty piece about how do we work in harmony with nature more and really respect all of the, you know, the beings, the flora and the fauna that were there first.
Yeah, and I think a small farm and someone like you is the one paying attention to this. Although there are, I know, other companies who are being thoughtful, but it is important to see that there is an important role for women in agriculture, especially in our state. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, we've been involved with the Female Farmer Project, which is a really important thing that's happening here, and they're working on a documentary about women farmers, and that's based in Washington State. But I think women have a different approach to agriculture, and for me, I have sort of become a mother as I've become a farmer, and working with the sheep, I think, has made me a better mother, and it's also helped me take a nurturing approach to the animals and the food that we raise, and I think that that sort of female approach is really important in agriculture because that's how we get to a place of sustainability.
You say there's also an important connection between art and science.
Yeah, I think that's been my inner struggle. You know, I started out as a poetry major in college, and I love poetry, but I feel like I also felt sort of a responsibility to get a job and also to work, work towards coming up with solutions for how we live on the earth. And so I spent, a decade or more in agricultural science. But really, when you're trying to reach people, when you're trying to get people to care, I've worked a lot in our land grant college through the extension system, which is about translating science to the public. What's important is really getting people to pay attention and to relate to what's happening. And poetry has a way of doing that nothing else can. So that's 100%. Sort of the art for me is really making people want to know where their food comes from and really continue to change their lives.
And I couldn't agree more. Also an English literature major, also think that a warning should come with that major once you choose it. But how clever of you to merge the two. And I can't wait to learn more. And if you want to learn more, Jessica is holding a reading tonight, October 12th, at the Elliott Bay Book Company. You can visit their website for more information.